This is what we've been wearing for the past 20 months. Good evening. I'm Barbara Tinnerman Cecil, and on behalf of Susie Spittler and Tom Beck, who tapes these sessions, I want to welcome you to the 39th oral history taping. It is Monday, October 27th, 2021, and tonight we will hear about COVID-19, how it has affected our world, our country, and the town of West Melton. Our first speaker is Virgil Gallagher, and he will begin with a little history of COVID. Virgil.
When this COVID-19 started, we didn't even know what it was. It was spreading through China very quickly, and people were dying by the thousands. Americans in China were coming out as quick as they could get on planes and brought it to the U.S. with them. It quickly spread throughout the country. Just so no one thinks that we're alarmist, we have at this point had 43 million cases of COVID, and we've had 700,000 deaths. So it's pretty serious. At first, there were no masks to protect ourselves with, but once we realized how badly we needed them, good old Yankee ingenuity kicked in, and large and small factories in the U.S. started making them. Because we had to depend on China to get what we needed, and they didn't have any left. People soon learned how to make their own and started selling them. Fairly soon thereafter, the large drug companies started working on a vaccine because they had experience and had some idea what needed to be done. They had made vaccines for other types of viruses in the past. It took many months to perfect the vaccine and distribute it, so people started staying home and isolating themselves to stay safe. For those of us who were older, that meant total isolation from going almost anywhere. No restaurants, no groceries, no bars, no church, no family, no gatherings of any kind. Fortunately for us, the large groceries had just started curbside pickup shortly before this started, and it got so popular that they stopped charging a fee to do it. People started hoarding certain items such as toilet paper and hand sanitizer, so the stores had to start limiting these items. Once again, our factory stepped up and filled these shortages, and it soon evened itself out. Shirley and I were very careful because of our age, because the nursing homes had people die by the hundreds in our age bracket. The younger people, the healthier people, were not quite so vulnerable. People could no longer visit their loved ones in the nursing homes, just see them through the windows. We spent over a year not going around people to try to stay safe. The one thing we did do was to take a ride once or twice a week, just to go nowhere in particular, just to get out and take our minds off the negative. God bless Shirley and I, and because we're retired and had an income, and lots of people didn't have anything. We were also blessed to be happy with each other, and it gave some of us time to gather our wool, as they say, and think about what was important in life. And our health came out to be pretty high on that list. We were like a lot of other people. We got lots of work done around our house, new kitchen, painted the house inside, and so forth. But so many other people did the same thing that some building materials became scarce. As a nation, we couldn't get enough trucks to move material from coast to coast, even if we could get it. And that made it even worse. If we learned one lesson during this time, we should have learned that we may depend on foreign countries to supply our needs too much. All of our medical people were on the front lines. The hospitals throughout the country, for the most part, were full and had to postpone many surgeries or try to move people to other area hospitals. Our medical people were getting sick and dying early on before the vaccine and were very overworked for a long time. It was particularly hard on young families that couldn't go to work and had very little income. At this point in history, this day and time, many more women work outside the home, so when businesses started shutting down, the women didn't get to stay home and take it easy because the schools were closed also. The kids had to be homeschooled, and that made it particularly hard on single moms who had to work from home, which had become a thing very quickly. It made us appreciate our school teachers in the same way that we appreciated our medical people. Our youngest daughter is in partnership with another girl here in a beauty shop in town, and they shut down beauty and barber shops for quite a while. She went to work doing something called DoorDash, delivering food from restaurants to people's doors. Home delivery and carry-out was about the only way you could eat out for over a year. Our second daughter is a nurse in the pre-op, and she lived with the fear of COVID every day. And as the vaccine got more plentiful, on her days off, she would meet with her vaccinated friends and have cookouts and so forth outside, which was allowed so they could unwind. Our third daughter also works in a hospital in the maternity ward, and lots of women were sent to other hospitals because they had so much COVID there and were overcrowded. About the time we have it whipped, a new variant pops up, so who knows when and where it's going to stop. In closing, I'd like to say, even though we have had 3 friends, 3 relatives, 1 neighbor, and 2 acquaintances die during this time from COVID, I think the people in other states and other countries that have had it a lot worse than us. So let us give thanks that it's not worse here as it is in some other countries. Thank you. And now I'll pass it on to Scott.
Thanks, Virgil. My name is Scott Fogle. I'm a lifelong resident of West Milton, and I was on City Council for several years. And while I was on City Council, I was asked by Matt Klein, Mayor Anthony Miller, and Dr. Brad Ritchie if I would start up a West Milton area COVID-19 relief effort to help out those individuals in the community that were at high risk or didn't want to go out to the grocery, or couldn't go out to the grocery, or couldn't go out to get their medications and so forth in the community. So we started this up in middle of March, right after everything happened when the state was shut down and we were quarantined and we weren't supposed to go out unless we desperately needed to. I reached out via email and through Facebook, and we were able to get 30 volunteers throughout the community. The volunteers were through or from areas within West Milton, Ludlow Falls, Laura, Potsdam, all of Union Township, Union and Englewood as well, that volunteered to help out. So we had a dedicated phone line that was set up, and it worked out great. It was set up here at the village, and the way it worked is someone called in, and that phone line went directly to an email message that I received, and then I in turn contacted one of our volunteers, who then went out directly and purchased whatever was needed from individuals, if they needed groceries, if they needed their medications picked up, that type of thing. So during that time frame between March and the end of July, we did this from March through the end of July, we performed 40 different relief efforts helping people out within the community. So the majority of the areas that we helped out were individuals that lived in the McKinley Commons and individuals that lived in the Princeton Village community. So mainly the senior citizens within the West Milton area. One of the volunteers came out with a great idea around Easter, because we couldn't do a whole lot to help people, and a lot of people couldn't get out to do what they normally do with their families for Easter dinner and so forth. So we worked with the Highland Church Food Pantry and the Bowman family and other donations throughout the village and throughout the area, and we were able to put together Easter baskets for a lot of the individuals that contacted us for relief efforts that needed the food, and just we're looking to help them out and make Easter a little bit more special for them. So this was a great effort. It was awesome to see the community come together as a whole to really rally around and help their fellow village residents with this effort, and it worked out great. Then another thing that I experienced during the whole COVID issue was my family at one time, it was around Christmas time, we all decided to get together, and we were deciding whether or not it was a good idea. Should we do this? Should we do it? Should we do it? Well, ended up we got together for Christmas, and 5 days after we got together, 5 people in our family contracted the virus. So my dad, my mom, my brother, my sister-in-law, my wife all got the virus. Myself, my daughter, my son, my niece, and her boyfriend did not. So it's hard sometimes to explain, but this virus has, hit us all in one way, shape, or form. I work at the base. I work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I've been teleworking from home since last March of 20. So it's been a long time that I've been working from home. It's not my cup of tea. I'm a people person. I like being around my work family. I like being at work and getting back to some normalcy. I have went back to work periodically about 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so that's been great. I do see some people at work, but still things are not even close to normal of what they were before. So I've had that as well on the work aspect. So hopefully here maybe within the next couple months we'll get back to some normalcy again and go back into the office and get back to normal, not have to wear the masks and so forth. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride for sure. Like I said, with this West Milton area COVID relief effort, it was so great to see everybody come together and to help out with that. And I was very appreciative to be involved and help the people out in the community that needed it. So I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Jim Sarver to talk from here.
Thanks, Scott. My name's Jim Sarver. I'm going to touch a little on the death care profession and how it's affected this community and how it's affected what we do. This is September 27th, and we've had probably several dozen deaths in this community as of with COVID. This community and the surrounding community. We saw the surge back in the fall, kind of tapered off, and again it started again beginning of this year. Not since, and Virgil touched on the isolation, not since the blizzard in the mid-70s have we felt this much isolation or isolation at all. Back then it was like a 7-10 day deal where you couldn't go out and do what you wanted to do. This has been a long, extended process. Been very challenging. I think one of the things I noticed the most is the lack of community and lack of gathering. I think it's affected our village of not being able to get together for 18 months. I see churches that are struggling because of COVID, people afraid to gather and come back to church. And I see the whole kind of spirit of Milton needs to be reinvigorated a little bit because we have not been able to get together. Gathering times, at funerals, we've had some issues emotionally with people. It's a delayed healing process during grief of not getting together. We've had families who've postponed funerals for a year, hoping everything would be better and they could safely gather and be a family together again. We've seen multiple COVID deaths in one family, all ages. So there's a lot of challenges. Travel, people come in for funerals and services, not being able to travel, not being able to see grandma, grandpa in the nursing home. A lot of people die alone in the care center. So those are some challenges that the community's faced. They've done a great job of adapting to some of these changes. But as far as the death care business, it's been a traumatic change for our group. A side note, may not seem like a very important thing, but in the fall and now, there are a lack of caskets being made. Now, you don't think that would affect that, but it certainly has. The largest casket manufacturer last fall were unable to produce enough caskets for people to use for the type of caskets that they wanted. Small little detail, but it affects everybody. The supply of that, it kind of helped a little bit during the early part of the year until this surge came back. But the surge has affected us, affected the community as a whole, and I really think the lack of being able to gather and to be together, not just at funerals, but at other activities, has made a strain on everybody, a challenge for everybody in the community. But that's kind of my little thing here as far as the how it's affected us and the delayed, extended grief process and the lack of people being able to get together and share and be part of it at the normal 3 to 4 day situation. Like I said, we've had funerals now that the person died a year ago, and we're just now having a service or a celebration of life for those folks. So that's how it's affected us in our time of work. So, Dr. Poling, it's up to you. Cliff Poling.
Thank you. My name's Cliff Poling. I'm an optometrist. Been an optometrist for 44 years. I've been in West Milton from 1983 to 2021. I've lived in West Milton since 1984, and I was asked to just talk about how COVID has affected my business and me personally. As Virgil said, in March, when COVID sort of hit, so to speak, we became aware of it, and then later, about the middle of March, the authorities and health officials advised optometrists to not provide routine eye care and only provide emergent eye care. So on about March 20th, I closed the office, and we had a answering machine, so I would go in that whole time after that and answer patients' questions that called in. I would deliver materials that came in that were ordered prior to that, and sort of kept the thing going. My employees were put on unemployment, and I applied for and received some help with the Payroll Protection Program loan that helped small businesses maintain some survivability as far as their employees. So the effect of that was, for a couple months, the services weren't available in the community, and people that maybe wanted to get their eyes checked had to delay it. When we resumed about the end of May, so it was about 2 months later, we had to modify the office procedures, wear masks, temperature checks, lots of hand washing, basically just trying to be careful, because obviously the virus was known by then to be very communicable, easily spread, but you didn't really know how. Sometimes you'd be in environments and it would spread, and others not. So, so then about September 8th, a patient came in the office, and contact lens patient, so we were close. I had a mask and they had a mask, but with contact lens, you take masks off to work sometimes with them. And that patient, these dates were established after the fact. That was on a Tuesday. Then Friday, I had an employee that said, well, I'm not feeling too good today, and she didn't come in. Then Friday, that day I felt okay, but I was tired. But you know, when you're 69, you're tired. So I didn't think anything of it, quite frankly. Then on Monday, she received her test back that she was positive for COVID. So since I'd been a little tired, that day I went and got a COVID test, and on the next day, Tuesday, I was informed that I was COVID positive. So my initial symptoms basically were fatigue and a mild headache. I usually don't get headaches, but it was a real mild headache, so I didn't really think anything of it. I might have been dehydrated, who knows. The problem is the fatigue continued after Tuesday, so that's a week after exposure. It kept getting worse, and then Wednesday or Thursday I developed a temperature. Then after that, body aches, chills. I picked up an orange and it didn't smell like nothing, no smell, loss of appetite. And probably in discussing this with a lot of people, I had a COVID rash from basically my waist to my chest. It's like chicken pox. It was just pretty uncomfortable and pretty unsightly. That lasted about 3 or 4 weeks. Advil helped about every 4 hours. My wife's a nurse, my daughter's a nurse. They sort of watched over me pretty carefully, but my symptoms never got to the point where I had to go to the hospital. During this time, obviously, we closed the office again, and I notified all the patients that I had been in contact with that they probably had some COVID exposures, just so they would know and take whatever actions they wanted to for testing or so forth. As I said, I could establish those dates because in November, the patient came in and said, well, I'm sorry I didn't come in and get my glasses sooner, but after I was in your office, 2 days later, I was in the hospital with COVID. So I said, bingo, that's where I got it. Gradually, I felt better after a couple weeks, but it was a slow process and probably took 6 or 8 weeks for me to feel, quote unquote, normal again. So I feel fortunate that I survived the COVID, and it's something to be reckoned with. A lot of casualties equal to our involvement in other armed conflicts. It's like Virgil said, 700,000 people have died in this country from it. So I thank the opportunity to speak, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Bill Ginn.
Well, good evening. I'm Bill Ginn. I've been a physician in West Milton since 1984. Next door to this building. Louder? Yes. Okay. I've been a physician in the next door building since 1984. Was born and raised in this town. I can tell you that from the COVID standpoint, I've never quite experienced anything like this in medicine. I am sure I found my first patient in January of last year. I had a gentleman who went to the ER over at the Kettering Hospital in Troy and had some very odd symptoms. Pretty bad cough, high fever, and he literally crashed while he was in the ER. Was taken to the ICU and intubated within 24 hours, and with this illness that no one knew what was going on. About that time, it was about the 3rd week of January, and we'd heard of COVID, but it was still in China. It wasn't going to bother us. So we didn't really put 2 and 2 together until much later. He was in the hospital on the ventilator for something like 3 weeks, touch and go, and survived it. And eventually came back to my office about a month later, and I remember discussing with him how odd his symptoms were, and what did they tell you it was? And he said, they didn't tell me anything. So it was, I'm convinced that was him, and he was my index case. Although I have patients who think they've had it in November and December of last year. So that carries us into about March, and the night that the state shut down, we were at a drug company dinner. I had taken my staff and we were eating out, and the word came out that would be the last dinner we had out to eat for a long time. Came back to the office, really didn't know what to do. We weren't receiving a lot of direction from the state at that point. So we began to screen our patients' symptoms very closely and try to direct people for testing when it seemed like their symptoms were commensurate with COVID, what we knew of COVID at that time. And we managed to make it through the first several weeks without too much fanfare, but our patient volume was very much lowered. And we began to kind of restrict our office hours to the point where I was answering phones myself in the afternoons completely. And you wouldn't believe how alarmed patients are when the doctor answers the phone, when they call up and want, they have a runny nose. So at any rate, that went on for actually about 2 months. I remember going home from the office and showering and bathing because we didn't know what we were being exposed to. And there was just a feeling of I never had the feeling where my patients were almost adversarial, because if they came in with this, it could close my office down for 2 weeks. And I'm still an independent practitioner here. I'm not supported by any hospital company. So if I shut down for 2 weeks, I have no income for 2 weeks. So fortunately, we were able to make our way through that with the benefit of the payroll protection loan that Cliff mentioned. It enabled me to pay my staff. I don't have any full-time staff, so they didn't qualify for unemployment. So I was able to pay them with that and kind of get our bills paid. And we kind of muddled through until we got a little better handle on what COVID was and how to handle it. So we cautiously resumed our hours and kept our tight screening, and literally anybody that seemed suspicious, we sent them for a test before we saw them, which was, I felt bad about that, but protecting my staff, I have people who have some chronic illnesses, and we just could not afford to shut down. So we began our mask wearing, and of course we already were fairly trained in hand washing and that kind of thing, so that wasn't really a big step for us. But so the next thing was when we began to kind of figure out what treatment was, and I don't know if anybody's brought this up already, but we've, of course, some varied and sundry treatments were offered for COVID, everything from the vitamin supplements like vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc, to hydroxychloroquine, which kind of had a heyday there for a while. And now we're into things like ivermectin, which is the goat worming medicine. So initially, hydroxychloroquine was kind of touted. It kind of fell by the wayside. I think now they're using it just for hospitalized patients. There was a time there in Ohio when we weren't allowed to prescribe hydroxychloroquine. It wasn't a medication that I felt uncomfortable with because we'd been prescribing hydroxychloroquine for great lengths of time for conditions like lupus and inflammatory tissue diseases. I'm sure Cliff probably saw hydroxychloroquine in his eye. There was an eye issue with hydroxychloroquine, which was one of the caveats with that. At any rate, that kind of was taken away from us. We didn't really have a lot to treat it with. People would call up, and they still do, call me up and ask me what to do, and I say, get some rest, take some ibuprofen, take some vitamins. If you get worse, you got to go to the ER because they're equipped to handle that, and we are not equipped to handle acute patients. In fact, to this point in time, I don't believe I've had an acutely diagnosed patient in my office. I've had post-COVID patients, but we're putting some restrictions on when they can come back and see us, and because honestly, there isn't really much we can do for it. Now, some questions regarding the virus, and I don't want to go on too long here, but the virus itself, my next topic that I'm asked multiple times a day is, should I get the vaccine? And my answer to that has been, I'm a proponent of the vaccine. However, I certainly understand people who don't want to get the vaccine. I understand people who don't want things put in their body that they haven't authorized. I completely understand that. I would never chastise anyone for not getting the vaccine. However, when people ask me that who are unvaccinated, I tell them, prepare to get the virus. I mean, if you don't want to get the virus, get the shot. But if you don't get the shot, you're going to get the virus. Now, you will most likely survive it, but a certain percentage of people do not. So if you're willing to roll those dice, it's your body. What goes in it should be up to you. And I don't agree with mandates and things like that about who should have to get the shot and those kind of things. I think that's wrong, but that's me. The other thing that I found has been really effective for COVID patients is this antibody infusion that they are now administering in the ER. That to a person seems to work. So those people who are quite sick can go to the ER. It has to be within a week of the onset of symptoms, however. I think it was originally 10 days. They've dropped it to a week. If you don't get it within a week, they will not give it to you. The only other thing I wanted to say is I know Jim has addressed it to some degree, but from the coroner's aspect, being the coroner of the county, I'm constantly being questioned about how many deaths I have and those kind of things. Well, the coroner does not see every death. So I want to make that clear. There are, if a person dies and their physician feels completely comfortable signing their death certificate and law enforcement has not been involved, then those deaths do not cross my door. But in 2020, I had 296 coroner-related deaths in the county, and 15 of those were COVID for me. So 15 out of 296. Okay. I had 16 suicides last year, and I had 31 overdoses. So if you want to put that in perspective, 15 COVID, 16 suicides, 31 overdoses. This year, as of today, I have 235 deaths, so I'm ahead in deaths. I have 6 COVID cases out of 235. In that period of time, I have 11 suicides, 18 overdoses, and 13 automobile accidents. So from the coroner standpoint, it has not been a major impact for me. There have been some stories about coroners being coerced to use COVID as a diagnosis. I have not run into that, except in one case when I was asked to change a death certificate and I refused to do it. So that's all I really have about COVID. So.
Anybody else have anything that they want to talk about again? Any other thoughts?
Like you're talking about the death certificates, the government now pays for COVID funerals.
Okay.
That's something that's $9,000 for, if you have COVID on your death certificate. Some people have been asked that before, some people didn't want COVID on the death certificate, but with the $9,000 now, some people, the COVID on the death certificate is beneficial to them.
Yes, and that Jim told me that a couple of weeks ago, and I had not realized that. So there is some impetus to change, but
you get some pushback early when you put it on, correct?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. This is a true issue, but I had a patient who died of what I thought was a cardiovascular issue, who also happened to have COVID. Okay, I signed it out as cardiac arrhythmia, which I typically do with cardiovascular things, and I received a letter from the state about a week later asking me if I wanted to change the death certificate to reflect the COVID as the cause of death. Which I did not. However, their stipulation was, if I did want to change it, go ahead and change it. If I didn't want to change it, they wanted me to write a letter to them and explain to them why I did not change it. So it made it more difficult for me not to change the diagnosis to COVID. I did neither. I did not change the death certificate, and I did not write them a letter and explaining why, because I didn't think that was appropriate. So.
Jim, something I've wondered about, how do you handle when a person has died of COVID and they come into your funeral? How do you handle the body?
Well, that's the same thing we were doing when the AIDS thing came about. Do precautions on everybody we do now. Yeah. The risk is in the removal process from the hospital or nursing home, and then during the embalming process. But after that, there's not a threat at all. But there's different precautions, and there are some people who aren't doing it. We've had some people who aren't. Well, that's the situation we had early on. Some funeral homes were not taking COVID patients because some people wanted a funeral, and back then they limited it to 10 people, and I'm a little bit like a rebel, maybe like Doc Ginn. If somebody wants to have a funeral, I'm not going to limit it to 10 people. So if we had funerals from people outside of town that would come because they knew what we were still social distancing, requiring masks, but I wasn't going to limit the funerals for 10 people. So that was an issue early on. But now it's extra precaution, but it's similar to what we do anyway.
I'll take that one more step. As coroner, we refer our autopsies to Montgomery County's morgue, and their coroners down there, and they would not accept any patients who had COVID for autopsy. The only way you could get an autopsy on a COVID patient was if it was homicide, something like that. And at that time, the way they were handling it was they had 3 teams of coroners, 3 teams of autopsy assistants, those kind of things. And if one team got exposed, then that team was eliminated and the other team picked up the slack. But just an interesting side note, the major transmission of COVID from the autopsy specimens was from the bone dust when they would saw the skull to remove the brain. The bone dust was felt to be the most contagious part of it. And they refused. And first question when I called them up, they'd say, is this COVID related? And if it was, no transfer. So.
Barb, I'd like to say one thing. Sure. Just so people understand, we are still in the throes of this as of this date. As the oldest person here on this panel, it's still scary. It really is. Even though my wife and I have been vaccinated, it's still scary. We wear a mask and all that, but there's what they call a breakthrough now. A lot of people are getting it even though they've been vaccinated. And now it's starting to really affect the young people, high school kids, and it's really creating a problem there. So for people 20 years from now, they'll know it didn't just end today.
Right. Anybody else? Anybody else have anything to add? Ms. Paige, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Paige Barnes. I'm a senior at Milton. I play tennis and I'm in show choir. Okay, so I kind of wrote something down. It was challenging and different, not only for everyone but my life personally. When we first heard about the situation, it was only 2 weeks off of school, but those 2 weeks turned into days, months, and now almost years. I never thought that it would be such a challenge mentally and sometimes physically. And obviously I would like to inform you how it affected my life. For the schooling aspect, it was not my highest time. I've always been a straight A student and completed my work on time to the best of my abilities. However, without having a schedule placed during the first quarantine, I didn't complete my work until it was a couple of weeks late. And as an outcome, I ended up with grades not good to anybody's standards. Also, I personally do not feel prepared for college as I'm leaving in a couple of months. In the 2020 and 2021 school year, I took my first end of course exams ever, and only 3 out of the 5 were actual exams. The rest were turned into projects that we could complete online if necessary. And then when I got COVID, personally I didn't have any symptoms as most would. To me it was just like bad congestion. However, during the motions of having the virus, I know others who have had more exaggerated symptoms, for most cases resulting in being hospitalized or even passing away. People who are severely affected have more underlying health problems, underlying health conditions than most of the average people in America. Sadly, the person affected most by the virus happened to be someone near to my family. It was my choir teacher. During 7th grade, she found out she had cancer, and she was a fighter, and she never let anything stop her from caring about us unconditionally or wanting the best for us. However, around Thanksgiving, she came down with the virus and was hospitalized. Shortly after that, she was put on a ventilator. She was fighting through struggles and pains without even knowing it, but shortly after 3 months, she passed away. This was very challenging for me because she loved and cared about me, even when she had her own battles to fight. And when we stepped in that classroom, she only cared about us. She didn't care about what was going on in her life. While promoting the COVID-19 vaccine, you're turned either way. You either support it or you don't. One side is very against it because they don't look into the scientific reasons and they just go with what they hear online and they're worried about infertility, while the other side supports it because they support anything they care about with all their heart, and they are putting not only themselves but putting the community as their main priority with the vaccine. While everybody is split on the decision, I, being young, didn't really have a decision when it came to the vaccine, but I did end up getting it. I thought of losing my relatives and people who have impacted my life for the better, and I need to put others in front of mine to help raise a positive environment that I could be connected without worrying if I'm risking others' well-beings. While I may not know how multiple quarantines have infected your life, but the impacts around my life around the pandemic have been personally more towards the negative side. While no one is ever prepared for this, being a high school student trying to maintain a job and friendships while being stuck in a house is challenging. Our countries, give me a second. Our countries and personal growings have came to a halt while other countries have had more success handling the challenges. And I think as communities we should take more precautions without impeding the rights of the citizens while trying to get back to normal.
Did you have graduation? Did you have prom?
We didn't have prom one year, but the graduation was moved back to like July, I think, for my brother.
And how was graduation?
You could only have 5 people there, so my whole family didn't get to go.
Okay.
It's kind of sad, because we all watched him grow up, and then we didn't get to see the final steps.
So did you go to online classes?
Yeah, we did for the end of the school year, and then half of last school year, kind of.
Okay.
And my grades were not the best.
Challenging to try and study at home?
Yes, with a
Okay.
bunch of distractions around you.
Okay. All right.
How did it affect your show choir performances?
We had to, so the first year we didn't get to finish our season, and then the second year we had to perform in masks, which was really hard to sing and dance at the same time.
Sports? Do you do sports?
Yeah, I play tennis. I don't know what's wrong.
So you didn't have tennis matches when?
We did, but it was very separated. Like, we didn't get to all hang out. It was like you went and then you left.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Peyton Brown, and I'm a sophomore in college. Being born in a tragic time, less than a month after the attacks during 9/11, to graduating during a pandemic that no one has ever seen before. How COVID affected me since it has started. To begin, I did not get to have a regular graduation. I did not get to sit next to my peers. I instead sat in a field at Memorial Stadium, socially distanced from each peer. Granted, Milton Union did a great job and has done a great job with COVID and the regulations for that. People very close to me who had it, like my mother, changed my outlook on things for the good and for the bad. Not spending the last couple months at school and just being alone affected so many people's mental health. We missed out on things we worked so hard for, such as finishing the year out with government days or the senior picnic, and we didn't even get a senior prom. My freshman year of college was all online, so I didn't get to experience the college lifestyle like every other freshman gets to. So onto the sports aspect of things, my spring season was completely canceled, which was tennis. The same season, I would have won my 3rd consecutive conference title, and I would have helped our team win the 9th straight title. Not to mention what could have happened for postseason, such as sectionals, districts, and state. But as we all know, that was all canceled. So on to wrestling, I started training really hard. My junior year, I took off football season to focus just on wrestling. I qualified for the state tournament for wrestling, which was not only my goal, but my goal is to get on the podium. I was like 4 pounds over the day before state, and I was like pumped because for me, that's not a lot compared to what it normally is. And so I was pretty happy about that. The state tournament usually sells like 50,000 tickets per year. So I was really excited to go wrestle at the Shot and put on a show, and I did not get to get that chance. I was sitting in English class and I get a phone call from my dad, and I answered it sitting in class, and he tells me, he sounded like real like upset, and so at the same exact time, the PA up in the ceiling during class went off, and wanted me to come down to the office, and I was confused, and down there in the hallway met Coach Mark Lane and Coach Andrew Slankoski, and they just had to give me the heartbreaking news that the state tournament in Columbus was going to be canceled. And there were opportunities that were definitely missed, and possible scholarships missed, because I didn't get to go to the shot that weekend and show all the recruiters what I was about. So that's a way that COVID affects me until this day. Working in a school last year, I worked Milton Union, employed through Miami County. I worked there, and I was working in a special ed room. COVID affected me there because the kids were not COVID precautious, and the kids are great. They're all over you and doesn't follow the guidelines, but just something that you got to take into consideration of how COVID affects teachers' lives every day. I mean, they work really hard, and they're affected really bad by that. So another way COVID affected me was my family members could not go to my little brother's sporting events because of the ticket limitation due to COVID. My graduation also had 4 tickets per person, per graduate, that could go and watch graduate. And people have grandparents that would love and go and see people graduate, and they didn't get to have that opportunity due to COVID. COVID's changed a lot of things. I mean, me and my family, we did not take any vacations due to COVID that first year. We normally take a couple a year, and we just didn't get a chance to do that. And I mean, I flew this summer. I mean, airports, the airplanes, different states, they're all completely different from what it was. It's almost like an entire new world that we live in. And in conclusion to that, I think COVID-19 has not only negatively affected people physically, but mentally as well. And that's my stance on that. So my name is Peyton Brown, and I'm a sophomore in college.
Thank you very much, panel. It was very interesting, very enjoyable to hear. Not so good that we've all experienced this, but we're all doing our best to get through it, and we will. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, audience.